Good morning, Magic. I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast and also of the Commander Format panel. And today I and the panel are very excited to introduce to you the beta test of our new Commander matchmaking system, Commander Brackets. In our last article in October, we talked about a system kind of like this, but since then have iterated on it a lot, and the whole group has done really fantastic work, and we're excited to tell you about it today. We're going to share with you the system and also the roadmap of what you can expect in the future. Now, before we get into Commander Brackets and all of how they work, there are three things I want to mention at the very top of this video. The first thing is that I expect for many of you out there, this system will change nothing about how you interact with Commander. If you're having great games at home with your play group, that's fantastic. I love that. That is wonderful. You don't need a robust matchmaking system. And if that's working for you, that's great. However, as Commander has grown and you're more likely to go to a game store with a bunch of folks you've never played with, or go to a convention or something like a MagicCon, you wanted to create more of a common language to help you find those well-paired games. I'm sure many of you have had that experience of sitting down at a Commander table and after a few turns, quickly realizing that your decks are not well matched against one another. I would think of this as kind of replacing the power level 1 through 10 system that has been used in the past. It's something sort of like that in direction. One thing Commander has really lacked is a good way to discuss what kind of game you want to play, and this is meant to help with that. And of course, Rule 0 is still active. If you sit down and say, hey, I'm a bracket 2 deck with this one difference, is that okay with you all? That's totally fine. Number 2, this system cannot stop bad actors. If someone is lying to you and wants to sit down and play against you with a deck that is mismatched, we can't stop that ultimately. This is really meant to help people who want to earnestly find good games against one another, find each other and make that happen. And finally, thing number 3, we really want to stress this is a beta test. While we're really excited about all of this, we're also pretty sure it's not 100% perfect, and that's where you and your feedback come in. Let us know on social media, on the official Magic Discord, in the comments down below what you think. We would love to take all that back and go refine this to make it the best it can possibly be. And to that end, if you're at MagicCon Chicago, we're going to take a part of the command zone and make it focused on trying this out. So feel free to stop by and give it a try. Of course, you can play this anywhere, not just in that specific part of the command zone. You can try it out at home right now. And also in the command zone at MagicCon Chicago, there'll be plenty of normal tables for you to go check out. But it is something we're actively looking for feedback on, and we'll have folks both from Wizards and the Format panel in that area watching it and checking it. Now, with those three things said, let's get into Commander Brackets.
So here's how the Commander Bracket system works. There are 5 Commander Brackets, and each one is meant to classify a different kind of game experience. Brackets 1, 2, and 3 are different levels of socially focused play, and Bracket 4 and 5 are focused on a higher power or even competitive experience. In each bracket description, you'll also find guidance around 4 kinds of effects that can really impact games: 2-card infinite combos, extra turns, mass land denial, and tutors, 4 things other than lands, noting where and how you should expect to see them. For a little bit of additional definition around mass land denial, this is a category of card that a majority of Commander players find frustrating. So to emphasize it up front, you should not expect to see these cards anywhere in brackets 1 through 3. These cards regularly destroy, exile, and bounce other lands, keep lands tapped, or change what mana is produced by 4 or more lands per player without otherwise replacing those lands. Examples in this category are Armageddon, Ruination, Sunder, Winter Orb, and Blood Moon. Basically, any cards and common game plans that mess with several people's lands or the mana they produce should not be in your deck if you're seeking to play in brackets 1 through 3. Additionally, you'll also see some references to the Game Changers list. This is a new small list of cards we'll share at the end that these brackets refer to and are cards targeted at higher bracket play. First, let us show you the brackets. Bracket number 1, Exhibition. The experience here is to throw down with your ultra casual Commander deck. Winning is not the primary goal here, as it's more about showing off something unusual you've made. Villains yelling in the art, everything has the number 4, oops all horses, those are all fair game. The games here are likely to go long and end slowly. Just focus on having fun and enjoying what the table has brought. And the deck building rules for here are no cards from the Game Changers list, no intentional 2-card infinite combos, mass land denial, or extra turn cards, and tutors should generally be sparse. Bracket number 2. Bracket number 2 is called Core, And the easiest reference point is that the average current pre-constructed deck is at a bracket 2 level. While bracket 2 decks may not have every perfect card, they have the potential for big splashy turns, strong engines, and are built in a way that works toward winning the game. While the game is unlikely to end out of nowhere and generally goes 9 or more turns, you can expect big swings. The deck usually has some cards that aren't perfect from a gameplay perspective, but are there for flavor reasons, or just because they bring a smile to your face. And then for bracket 2 deck building, no cards from the Game Changers list, no intentional 2-card infinite combos or mass land denial, and extra turn cards should only appear in low quantities and are not intended to be chained in succession or looped. Tutors should be sparse. Bracket number 3 is called Upgraded, and these decks are souped up and ready to play beyond the strength of an average pre-constructed deck. They are full of carefully selected cards, with work having gone into figuring out the best card for each slot. The games tend to be a little faster as well, ending a turn or two sooner than your bracket 2 decks. This also is where players can begin playing up to 3 cards from the Game Changers list, amping up the decks further. Of course, it doesn't have to have any Game Changers to be a bracket 3 deck. Mini decks are more powerful than a pre-constructed deck, even without them. These decks should generally not have any 2-card infinite combos that can happen cheaply and in about the first 6 or so turns of the game. But it's possible the long game could end with one being deployed, even out of nowhere. So for deck building here, you get up to 3 cards from the Game Changers list. And once again, I'll get into what that is in a little bit, but you get up to 3 cards here. It's where they start showing up. You have no intentional early game 2-card infinite combos. Extra turn cards should only appear in low quantities and are not intended to be chained in succession or looped, and no mass land denial. Now let's go on to bracket 4, which we're calling Optimized. And here, it's time to go wild. Bring out your strongest decks and cards. You can expect to see explosive starts, strong tutors, cheap combos that end games, mass land destruction, or even in a deck full of cards off the Game Changers list. This is high-powered Commander, and games have the potential to end quickly. The focus here is on bringing the best version of the deck you want to play, but not one built around a tournament metagame. It's about shuffling up your strong and fully optimized deck, whatever it may be, and seeing how it fares. For most Commander players, these are the highest power Commander decks you will interact with. And there are no deck building restrictions here, other than, of course, the ban list. And finally, bracket number 5, simply CEDH. This is high power Commander with a very competitive and metagame focused mindset. And mindset is a key part of that description. Much of it is in how you approach the format and deck building. It's not just no holds barred, where you play your most powerful cards like in bracket 4, it requires careful planning. There is care paid into following and paying attention to a metagame and tournament structure, and no sacrifices are made in deck building as you try to be the one to win the pod. Additionally, there is special care and attention paid to behavior and tableside negotiation, such as not making spite plays or concessions that play into the tournament structure. CEDH is where winning matters more than self-expression. You might not be playing your favorite cards or commanders, as pet cards are usually replaced with cards needed in the metagame, but you're playing what you think will be most likely to win. And once again, for deck building here, there are definitely no restrictions other than the ban list, of course. So those are the 5 brackets, but I've mentioned the Game Changers list a number of times. So what is the Game Changers list? You saw several mentions of this list above, and this is something new that we want to introduce. We think it will be a huge help for matchmaking and understanding the format. Game Changers are cards that dramatically warp Commander games, allowing players to run away with resources, shift games in ways that many players dislike, block people from play, efficiently search for their strongest cards, or have commanders that tend to take away from more casual games. And unlike some previous systems that were discussed, it's only a single additional list to track. In addition to that function, you can imagine this as a sort of watch list. Any future bans are likely to come from this list, save for maybe something that shows up in a new set and immediately causes problems, like Nadu. Similarly, unbanned cards are likely to end up here. This creates a nice half step between the ban list and showing up everywhere. It also really helps ensure that you know what cards we have our eyes on, so cards won't feel like they're being banned out of nowhere in the future. It also gives us a tool to unban cards to try them, or nudge around cards without a ban needed. If a card shows up and is frustrating at casual tables, but fine by competitive players, we can add it to the Game Changers list in an update to get it to the right place. And similarly, if times or opinions change and a card on this list looks fine in casual play now, we can take it off the Game Changers list. It's not unlike how Canadian Highlander adjusts point values every now and then. Now, to be clear, most of these cards are unlikely to be banned. You shouldn't go trading away your Gaia's Cradles in concern. However, it is a clear signal for players to know that these cards indicate a different kind of play and that others might prefer to not play against them. We all discussed a lot what we felt should be on this list to make it useful but manageable, and ended up at exactly 40 cards. And that number being around is just coincidence. The list doesn't always have to be 40 cards. Here is our initial Game Changers list for the Commander Brackets beta test. And as you're going down this card and looking, a lot of them will probably be cards you could guess would be on this list. These are cards that are very powerful and often game warping in Commander. The exact cards on the Game Changers list is something we'll be carefully looking for feedback on during the beta period, so please let us know your thoughts. So let's do just a quick recap here. Bracket 1 is called Exhibition. This is incredibly casual with a focus on decks built around a theme, like the Weatherlight Crew, as opposed to focus on winning. No game changers, 2-card combos, mass land denial, or extra turn cards are here, and tutors should be sparse. Bracket number 2 is Core. The power level of the average modern day pre-constructed deck sits here. No game changers, 2-card combos, or mass land denial, and you shouldn't expect to be chaining extra turns together. Tutors should be sparse. Bracket number 3 is Upgraded. Decks here are stronger than modern day pre-constructed decks, but not fully optimized, and include a small number of game changers. Up to 3 game changers, no mass land denial, no early 2-card combos are here, and you should not be expecting to chain extra turns together. Bracket number 4 is Optimized, and here you go wild with your highest power cards. There are no restrictions other than the ban list. Bracket number 5 is CEDH. This bracket is powerful with an eye toward a metagame and tournament structure. And once again, no restrictions other than the ban list. What are the game changers? Well, the game changers are 40 cards that have a huge impact both in Commander and the kind of game you're playing. It's like a half step to be able to notch cards up but not ban them, and future unbans will likely go on this list to ease them in. It also informs players about cards that are at the upper end of Commander power, and any future bans will likely come off this list. Now, if you have questions, I have a little FAQ section I'll get to here in just a moment. But first, I want to share the upcoming roadmap so you know what's ahead. That way, you can better anticipate future updates. The first step is we want you to try out the Commander Bracket system and let us hear your thoughts. I'm sure we'll start hearing feedback basically immediately, and we're excited to see a bunch of people trying this in person at MagicCon Chicago. Depending on how that goes, will inform much of the future. Provided the system generally works and is heading in the right direction, we'll begin making revisions soon after MagicCon for any structural changes we want to include. Then, with the information of how that all went in mind, we'll begin discussing any potential unbans. With the Game Changers list as a tool, we can potentially unban cards and add them to the list to keep them available at the higher brackets while keeping them out of the lower ones. The goal here, provided the system works, will be to come back with one big article in late April that both rolls out the full system and any unbans all together. And as we said back in October, no bans will be happening at that time, just potentially some unbans. So if you're eager to hear about unbans, late April is the time to circle on your calendar. And if anything changes in the timeline, we'll let you all know. This schedule is naturally contingent on this system directionally working, of course. Once we're through that, we'll work on getting a regular cadence for updates when you know you can hear from us. And hopefully that clues you in a bit on what to expect coming up soon. All right, so let's get into that Q&A. As you can imagine, in the design process, there's a ton we talked about. So something we wanted to do was answer some questions up front that we thought might be common. This goes a little more into detail on topics for anybody out there who wants to dig in. So we hope it helps. So here's a potential question at the top. I don't like this. Do I have to use it? And the answer is no, not at all. As we mentioned at the very beginning, if your group is having success playing games you love without this, that is awesome. Go forth and keep having fun. This is just one tool you can use. The only thing I'd ask is that if you are looking for a way to matchmake your games, try it out and give it a fair shake. We'd love to hear what you think. Here's another probably popular question. Why is some card on the Game Changers list? So let me break down the reasons and categories for all the cards on the Game Changers list. First, we've got Enlightened Tutor, Mystical Tutor, Demonic Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, Imperial Seal, and Survival of the Fittest. These are all best-in-class tutors and tend to find combo pieces or just homogenize the game to play out similarly. While tutors are already mentioned in the bracket structure, these 6 incredibly powerful ones are ones we wanted to call out specifically. Drannith Magistrate, Opposition Agent, Trinisphere, Glacial Chasm, and the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale efficiently lock out your opponent's ability to use their cards, often in frustrating ways. Chrome Mox, Grim Monolith, Mox Diamond, Mana Vault, and Ancient Tomb are incredibly powerful fast mana pieces that accelerate the game and basically any deck can play. Smothering Tithe, Trouble in Pairs, Rhystic Study, The One Ring, Jessica's Will, and Bolas' Citadel provide overwhelming resource advantage and tend to cause a player to snowball with the game. Vorinclex Voice of Hunger is an extension of the mana denial restriction. It doesn't fully fit our description given and is a little nicer than the other mass land denial cards, but we still wanted to keep this card clear from the lower brackets. Lion's Eye Diamond, Underworld Breach, and Ad Nauseam are combo and storm cards, which are usually up to no good and can create power and goal mismatches at a more casual table. Gaia's Cradle and Sarah's Sanctum provide a huge mana boost and rapidly accelerate the game. Thassa's Oracle is a best-in-class way to win the game on the spot and is mostly used as a 2-card combo. Cyclonic Rift is a best-in-class way to reset everybody else in Commander, and often in not a very fun way. Expropriate, while expensive, the combination of taking a turn alongside stealing 3 permanents, provided none of them give you even more turns, is strong enough to often end games on the spot. Jin-Gitaxias Core Augur is a prime card to cheat out or reanimate, and this Jin removes their resources while ensuring you have endless in a quite unfun way. Now, Fierce Guardianship and Force of Will are free counterspells, and these were much debated. They're powerful and often protect your engine. Guardianship doesn't put you down a card to cast it, and Force of Will can counter anything, including commanders, and works on your turn, which often is used to protect your combos. That's an important distinction because Force of Negation was left alone, since it only counters non-creatures and only works on opponents' turns. And finally, Kinnan, Yuriko, Winota, Grand Arbiter Augustin IV, Turgrid, and Urza. First, I'll say, we wanted to be very careful with the legendary creatures we hit, as it essentially knocks them out of brackets 1 and 2. Additionally, your commander is the one thing you know before playing the game, so it gives you an easy way to say, hey, I don't want to play against that commander. However, after a lot of discussion, we felt like these 6 were almost never used fairly when played as commanders. I've never seen the fun, enjoyable for everybody Grand Arbiter deck out there in the wild, for example. There might be one person out there who has it, and to that person, feel free to try and convince the table. As mentioned earlier, Rule 0 still very much applies. But generally, these are commanders that have a certain pedigree of appearance and that most players don't want to play against at, say, bracket 2. This does apply to the rest of your deck as well, and while a lot of these cards can be better in your 99, we didn't want an additional list distinguishing cards that are only game changers when used as commanders. But if you have any feedback on that, please let us know. Okay, here's question 3. Why isn't Sol Ring on the Game Changers list? And the answer is that you're right, it qualifies as fast mana and otherwise would be here next to cards like Mana Vault. But the truth of the matter is, it's Sol Ring. It's the most iconic card in all of Commander. It's something that since near the beginning has been the poster child for the format. Playing one Sol Ring is a universal truth handed down from Sheldon Menery. So every deck gets exactly one Sol Ring to let it power up and accelerate a bit extra on occasion. And that remains true. Now, one thing about fast mana is it tends to compound. Once you have a little bit, it becomes strong to play a lot of it. So just Sol Ring being around at lower brackets is a lot different from Sol Ring and Mana Vault and Ancient Tomb and so on. Okay, for another question, you think a certain card should be on the list. Why isn't it? So we talked about a ton of cards, and as mentioned before, the list is not final. It's in beta for a reason. So please send us your feedback and we will happily take it into account when working on the final version. Here's another question. What does it mean if my commander is on the Game Changer list? Well, as described above in the card-by-card explanations, these are commanders that tend to be exclusively frustrating and power outliers at lower brackets. It does mean you can't play them at bracket 1 and 2, but if you believe you have an exhibition or core deck using one of these cards, for example, let's say your deck commanded by Urza falls in the exhibition bracket because it's about retelling the story of the Brothers' War, Rule 0 is still very much in effect and you're welcome to talk with your table. Now, at upgraded bracket 3, this just means it counts toward one of your 3 game changers. And at the optimized and CEDH brackets, go wild. play these cards. Now here's a question about how the system is structured. Why are there 5 brackets? Doesn't it kind of boil down to 3 brackets? And it's true. There are essentially 3 categories. No game changers, some game changers, and all game changers. We looked at 3 brackets for a while, but a couple things became apparent. First, there's an audience that would really like to play a Commander game below the level of pre-constructed decks. And I personally think it's great that level exists. I've never built a purely goofy deck in my life, but now that I know I have terminology to find those exhibition matches in bracket 1, I feel a lot more like building one knowing there's a place to play them. On the other end of the spectrum, in talking with our CDH experts like Deco, Lewis Stardust, and Rebel, they really felt like there's a difference between high power and CEDH worth quantifying. Additionally, a great point that was brought up was that CEDH already has done exactly what we're trying to do here, with a label that indicates the kind of game you're looking for. They certainly have earned that official labeling, in part by virtue of it proving to have worked already. We do expect most Commander decks right now to fall into the core, upgraded, and optimized brackets. And that's totally okay. But having the room for exhibition and CEDH is something we felt was important, and if this is successful, those categories, especially exhibition, may grow over time. Here's a simple one. My best deck has no game changers and is technically a bracket 2 deck. Should I play it in bracket 2? The answer is just you should play it where you think you belong based on the descriptions. So, for example, if your deck has no holds barred power despite playing 0 game changers, then you should play in bracket 4. Here's another question you might have. Why 3 cards from the game changers list for bracket number 3? Well, we talked a lot about decks we had, what we expected, and what felt about right, so that your deck could have some of these cards show up, but not be full of them. We talked about 3, 4, and 5 cards, and while 5 doesn't sound like a lot, when the list is only around 40 cards, that's still a lot. Ultimately, we wanted to start lower and see how it feels, but we're very much open to your feedback on this. We also naturally expect people to talk about how many game changers are in their decks. So if someone says, hey, I have this number of game changers in my deck, is that okay? You can decide if that's something you're happy with. Another question. How worried should I be about labeling my deck correctly and finding the exact bracket to play with? Well, there's some wiggle room for sure. While playing against decks that are all inside your bracket is ideal, you can usually wiggle within one bracket away from yours safely. Bracket 2s playing against bracket 3s can work fine, but what this system is really trying to avoid is bracket 2s playing against bracket 4s. That's a huge difference and pain point for Commander games. So how can you use this system practically? Well, one thing I'm really excited about is being able to put decks from brackets 1 to 4 into my bag and having all 4 ready to play. That way, I can play with different people depending on the kind of game people want to play. But above all, the Commander bracket system is meant to provide players with greater terminology. Even being able to say something like, my deck has 5 game changers, is that cool? Gives you more agency when finding good games. Here's one for extra turn fans. Why is chaining extra turn spells called out specifically? And the reason is a single extra turn spell can be fun and splashy. However, extra turn spells take a lot of time away from other players and their ability to play the game, and they tend to be unfun when repeated. In multiples, they basically begin to function like a combo deck, where your combo is taking 4 turns in a row and getting so far ahead that nobody can catch up. A single extra turn spell, sure, but your Edric deck about chaining all of them together over and over, keep that for the higher brackets, please. Okay, so you've read all of this, but what if your deck accidentally has a combo or finds a way to chain extra turn spells? Well, I really want to say there's something to be said for intent here, which is why we call out no intentional combos and the intent to chain together extra turn spells. I've built decks before with unintentional combos in them, and if you steal a way to copy spells and cast an extra turn spell, you can go for it. There's a big difference between deck building intent and what happens in the game. For example, it's possible a game could end up with mass land denial if one player makes all lands into creatures and then another sweeps the board. That happens. There are a lot of cards in Magic, but if someone builds their deck to do that intentionally, that's the no-no. So if you accidentally find an easy 2-card combo in your deck, hopefully it's a good laugh for everybody and you now know to take it out for next time. Here's one for folks that have followed along for a little while. Is this the same thing as the power bracket system that we announced last year? And the answer is, this system can certainly trace its lineage back to that system. But as you see, it's quite a bit different. When we showed that off last September, we were giving you a behind the scenes look at something we were working on in progress. And one of the things about showcasing something before it's done is that it's likely to change. While directionally being able to bracket decks was useful, as the format panel dug into it, there were all kinds of challenges with that proposed system. For one, that system meant a ton of different lists you have to check against, which made it onerous. It also simultaneously meant you couldn't add a single high bracket card into your deck without being at the highest level. After doing a lot of iteration, we landed on this system, which only has a single list of cards, and bracket 3 lets you play a little bit of the higher bracket stuff without going fully into it, which is how many people build their decks. Finally, we wanted to move away from the word power, which is why these are called commander brackets. Swords to Plowshares and Counterspell are incredibly powerful cards, but they're also totally fine for games of Commander. We really wanted to focus less on power level and more on the game experience you want, and the cards that can radically change that game experience. Okay, so we didn't really talk about mana bases at all. Is there guidance for that? While mana is of course critical for playing Magic, it's rare that a mana base is what causes games to be unfun or warping for other players, which is what the focus is on here with this system. The further up the scale you go, the more I would generally expect stronger mana bases to show up because it matters more. CEDH decks will want the most efficient mana bases they can have, whereas mana bases for exhibition probably matters less because the games are slower and highly thematic, but there are no hard and fast rules around them here. Here's one about future precon design. Some game changers have showed up in recent pre-constructed decks, like Jessica's Will. However, the pre-constructed level of core, bracket 2, allows for 0 game changers. How will this influence future pre-constructed deck designs? Now, it's true that bracket 2 is the average modern day pre-constructed level, but the emphasis there is on average. Modern Horizons 3 commander decks and Secret Lair decks aren't in that mix, for example, and are places these cards could go. Now, depending on how the adoption of this system goes, this could go several ways. Just like how some people will rule 0 to include a game changer, I could imagine an incredibly appropriate game changer in a pre-constructed deck potentially being acceptable. I could even imagine a future, if this is popular enough, where brackets are included on product packaging, and we could occasionally release pre-constructed decks at different levels depending on the set. Imagine a highly thematic and flavorful set of 4 bracket 1 decks, or a set of juiced up bracket 3 decks. That's all just speculation at this point, and it's far too early to be working on that kind of thing. But in any case, when it comes to reprints, there will be plenty of places to put these cards. This system does not preclude us from making sure there are ways to get these cards out there in the future, including potentially in pre-constructed decks. Here's a straightforward question you may have. Will we begin intentionally designing cards to go straight to the Game Changers list? And the answer is a strong no. At Wizards, we don't see this as a tool to create even more powerful cards for Commander or anything of the sort. It's something to help matchmaking, not one to give us an excuse to push the envelope. Now here's a question with an answer I'm pretty excited about. Is there a way for the online tools I use to easily tell me what bracket my deck is? And the answer to that is yes. This is something that we wanted to roll out and get adopted into the mini community tools people use. It's really important to me and the whole panel that a community format involves these great community resources. So we've gone ahead and talked with the popular deck building websites Archidect and Moxfield, as well as the Magic search engine Scryfall, giving them a heads up on this whole system. And you should expect to see them implementing it very quickly. Some of them will even flip the switch by the time this video is live. What about if you're a fan of Magic Online? Can this help you out there? Well, Daybreak Games and the Magic Online team are aware, we've talked to them about it as well, and are working on a potential implementation of this, so stay tuned to them for future announcements. And finally, if you didn't see the question you were looking for answered here, please feel free to put it in the comments down below, drop it in the Commander channel in the official Magic Discord, ask on social media. Happy to try and take as many of these as we can. So thank you all for taking the time to check this out and for your patience as we put it all together. And I personally want to thank the rest of the CFP for all of their work. They took the initial idea we had at Wizards that we mentioned last October and really evolved it into something that is much more workable, much more understandable, and covers a wider array of Commander players. There was a lot of great debate and discussion, and while not every person necessarily aligns on every single element, I can see pieces from each and every person on the panel nestled somewhere in the DNA of Commander brackets. It's been really incredible to watch the team bring it together. So we've had a lot of great discussions talking about it, and now I'm excited for you to try it out. A fun exercise to run for yourself as you're packing for your next in-person Commander session is to try and bring decks of a few different brackets. I'm sure no shortage of pieces will be written, filmed, told in person, posted in our Discord, or even put in the comments down below, and I look forward to reading all of them. Many of us on the panel will see you in Chicago, and until then, on behalf of the entire Commander format panel, this is Gavin. I'll talk with you again soon, and until then, have fun playing Commander. You got this. Good morning, Magic. I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast, and what I have right here is an Aether Drift pre-release pack. We're gonna crack it open. I'm gonna build a deck. You can see the whole thing from start to finish, no cuts between. Let's get started. So, first thing you're gonna do, you're gonna get your pre-release pack. You're gonna pull off this little side here. Ice in your veins, fire in your engines is what it has to say. You'll open this up. It's got